It's good to see you guys all this Wednesday afternoon for the weekly briefing. This is our once a week time that we pull something out of community or pull something out that people are curious about and talk about it. And you'll see that there are three heads talking to you today because Joe is the person to grab the topic of the week. Joe, you started the conversation on community about this B2B conversation. So before we get too far into it, I'm gonna let Matt say hello, and then Joe, I want you to just say hello, tell people where you're from.
Howdy all. I'm really interested to see where this goes because I did both B2B and B2C work, and it was a constant struggle to make B2B work more sexy and more interesting.
Yeah, and, and that's what you
And
do, right, Joe? Yeah, go ahead and introduce yourself, Joe. That'd be
yeah,
great.
I'm Joe. Live north of Seattle now. Just moved here from Texas and originally from Michigan. So, and yeah,
That's great.
I've been doing B2B animation work for about 10 years now. So,
So, Joe, I know I'm going to get to your question in a second, but when you say B2B, why don't you kind of put some parameters on our conversation today so because people have a lot of different ideas of what that might mean.
mhm.
But specifically, you're talking about content created for companies that are doing B2B, right?
Yeah, so our clientele are businesses that serve other businesses. So in our case, it would be like robotics, manufacturing, automation, logistics, warehousing, that kind of thing. And so the communication that we're helping them with happens between two businesses as opposed to kind of this top-down hierarchy of the B2C.
And so when you're doing that kind of content, is it fall in the category of explainer videos or keynote presentations, conference presentations? Is that the kind of content you're making?
Yeah, pitch presentations, like a pitch videos for like say somebody is pitching to get a big multi-year contract. We would help them with that. Or like you mentioned before, a um, there somebody is presenting something they've been working on to executives, and they need a really flashy way to show that off.
Yeah. So the challenge there. So let's dive into the topic a little bit. The challenge is that we'll just say the price that you get for B2B work doesn't seem to match if you're doing commercial based work. The one time cost of a commercial or even some kind of showpiece is very different marketplace than when you're doing the type of work you're doing for the brands.
Yeah, that's it. Spot on. So my challenge has been how do I communicate the value of a video piece and ultimately like the costs that it costs us to make it. How do I communicate that to customers when only, maybe a couple dozen people are going to be seeing it? Whereas the value to them in that, and how do I have that conversation more intelligently with them?
Yeah, that's a good question. Because you know what's
Mm.
kind of not fair about this is that your the B2B work might be a high ticket sell at the end of it. Because
Mhm.
the 12 people, you might have a big ticket item there. But the person who's requesting that item, the content from you might not be recognizing that value proposition, or you might be having a hard time explaining, hey, but if you make $1 billion sale at the other end of this person buying the robot, don't I? This wasn't it worth spending another $100,000 on making it nice?
And I
Yeah.
think I tend to argue with myself there because in my mind and in um, their communication with the client, the video is probably a very small part of that. And so I think it's easy for everybody to make an argument that, oh, our relationship with this company is not really contingent on a nice presentation piece.
Yeah, sure.
But but Joe, with the sort of clients you're working with, I imagine you sort of come up against an engineering mindset quite a lot, where you're
Exactly.
working with a lot of very technically minded people, a lot of people focused on how, making things. And that's where your interface as a creative would be quite important because you're fundamentally a visual communicator, and you're helping them explain things. I had a business called The Explainers and spent a lot of time working with people with that sort of rabbit hole tunnel vision mentality where you're trying to go, hey, there's a bigger picture here. Obviously we'll do what you need, but to get someone to actually use your product, they need to understand it.
That's it for sure.
Yeah. So, it's interesting because one of the things that we can recognize and understand is that our work that we do does add a value to their presentation or their sale. From a point of view of, especially if it's a company only doing B2B sales, there isn't any kind of commercial based work. One of the decision points that marketing team is making is, well, basically, how much do I have to pay? What's my marketing budget for it, right? So we want to make an argument of the value proposition we can bring them. But I think one of the first things we need to is just understand what they're up against or why they make the decisions they make before we could step into that position. For me, the B2C value that's out there usually is related to the risk that agency or that brand is taking to put that commercial on air. So one of the highest paid commercial spots you can make is a Super Bowl commercial. And the reason you get paid so much to make the commercial is because they paid so much for the airtime of that commercial. And they don't want it to bomb in that really expensive 30-second spot they made. So the presentation space, basically the medium, the distribution of it is going to create a very different value proposition for that marketing department or that agency that's making that decision. In the case
I
of
was shocked in Australia finding that the media spend to creative was about 10-1, and so they've already been through that bill shock already. So your costs are quite reasonable considering what they've just paid for media.
Yeah, it's funny, right? Because that person's basically saying, I just paid all this money for the media buy. I don't want to look like an idiot and put something bad in that spot. So I feel like they invest in a creative proposition, let's say, in that case. And when we're selling ourselves into that space, we use I think it's Ryan Summers, the one that uses word, the pick me situation, where it's like, we're constantly just asking, can I please make that for you and get that one-time big hit, have that project in-house. I get a cash flow relief for a little while until I have to find the next big hit. And our model of selling and the model of their buying kind of has a match, but it's always like the short run. Our behavior also comes like, we made it and then we move on really quick. Okay, great. I need to go find the next big fish to land. So we ditch them and move on. But when a marketing department's doing B2B work, totally different relationship, isn't it? Because they kind of say to you, well, Joe, it's always going to be you. I just need something different from you. So you don't get the one-time hit, and it's not a really big hit, and you don't just run off. You're kind of becoming a creative partner inside of their marketing silo, aren't you?
Yeah, historically, I will say once I form a relationship, they tend to have a very high value over the period of years. But the project sizes are smaller. But yeah, getting my foot in the door or getting that first project off the ground does usually mean that they're going to be coming back to us for years to come.
Yeah. And what the term I'd say is customer lifetime value. All of a sudden you realize, well, I'm at the end of a 12-month period, that client did give me $500,000 of work. It just came in at a different schedule, at different hits. Then maybe I got one or two big projects worth $300,000 from a client. That partnership.
Ryan just pointed out on the chat. He said, "I wish every studio would redress their reels and swap out all the pretty stuff with the bread and butter work that they never talk about. That generates a healthy amount of the profit. And if only you knew how many Reese's Pieces commercials funded your favorite movie and title sequence."
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, like everyone does it, and even Buck does it on a massive scale. Like they're still super sexy, but their whole business model is built around doing global level B2B work, where they're doing all sorts of stuff that isn't necessarily videos. They're doing, UI and working with all the digital marketing channels to integrate. Yeah, exactly. Buck does 40% of their work as systems work.
Yeah. Yeah. There is we can talk about the kind of the upgrade model too, and qualifying these clients, because I think that there are B2B clients that probably aren't worth it, because the overall spend will not be very big at the end of the year. I know a few people right now that are doing basically only B2B work. And in that space, the clients they're working for, it might equal $90,000 at the end of the year. But they feel somewhat obligated because of the cause or the relationship that they have. And over time, you have to replace that. It does feel like the winners, the big winners that are doing only B2B work, are the ones that eventually end up making incredible, consumer displays or dashboards, or be part of the product exploration elements. So that ongoing relationship that you begin with doing the marketing pieces or marketing content can evolve deeper into those relationships as time goes on. So that's qualifying a client and understanding even what you like to do. If you wanted to design the dashboard for a future car, like, great, that B2B, the relationship is where you're going to get it way more than on the commercial side.
Jed just pointed out, especially with larger corporations, finding the gatekeeper is the hard point. Someone who appreciates the value of higher quality content and will introduce you more broadly across the organization. I always found that working with my favorite client was this guy called Aaron, who worked at an insurance company, and I realized that he was bored in the insurance company he was working for, and he kept wanting to make cooler stuff. And I sort of I gave him a nickname in my head as like Maverick Marketer. And I think like when I found these people inside these organizations that had these dreams of doing bigger stuff, like they actually wanted to reach across from the B2B and into the B2C. And I think he told me over a glass of wine, he said, I want to win a Cannes Lion. I want to go to Cannes. That's my dream. And it's like, well, you're working on some boring functional stuff. So we've got some work to do. But he understood what it would take to even if it was just using YouTube bannerhead space, but he would find space, we would make campaigns together, and I guess together we started making the sort of work we wanted to see, rather than just these buy it by the kilo or buy it by the pound, as you probably say in America, videos where someone goes, I've got $4.99, I want 3 pounds of video. I think for me, it's always trying to shift to the value or the outcome, where you can slowly make people see what it's worth.
Matt, we definitely don't say by the kilo in America. Sorry.
I thought you didn't. No. You might be at a special deli that is more globally minded. We don't know how to convert
pounds to kilo in America, let alone, I know there's things that come in kilos, but that's not probably the way.
I don't even know what a pound is. I get accused in American airports of being 20 pounds over. I'm like, well, that's meaningless.
I couldn't tell you.
But either.
Yeah. No, I like the way you're thinking of it, Matt. And Joe, maybe this is somewhat you're recognizing, is that in a way, the question you proposed is, how do we present the value that we're giving that client to possibly ask for more money and dive deeper into the relationship? And we're kind of asking the question differently. Hey, do we recognize the value that client gives us in return? So one part of the proposition might be to recognize that the marketing team or the marketing budget has limits financially. But in the case of the customer lifetime value, like you pointed out, is like, but it doesn't have a limit longevity, like the frequency of work. And matter of fact, I almost feel like you'd lock yourself into being the go-to group for that kind of work. And then if you can build out a pipeline or a systems to take care of that work, so you gain efficiency, the actual real gain is in the margins on that work. So you might not be a big ticket, but you might be hitting 50% margins because your efficiency, they're buying it off of a menu of like, I'll take one more of those, please, at 3,500. And it's costing you now 300 to make it because you're using this system you invented. And they're going to buy 300 of those. So you can get the scale version of it opposed to the one-off version of it. That's where I find that the B2B companies really win, is that entrenching themselves in a group and then getting that frequency of work. it is, as we're kind of pointing out, it doesn't show up on everyone's iPhone, right? And it doesn't have the pop culture hit to it. And we are trying to qualify clients. Maybe that B2B could lead to their also B2C work if there are brands out there that do both. But to reverse it a little bit on you, yeah, it's kind of interesting, isn't it, to realize, wow, Joe, you probably have value in your customers that, or in your clients, that many of the studio owners don't have yet.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's ultimately why I'm here. You know, I want to get that stuff reflected back to me.
Yeah.
Um,
The,
for
the
sure.
challenge we have almost everywhere is trying to figure out how to price this stuff, right? Is it clear to you? Like, does the client give you the price when they're doing something, or do they ask you to price the projects when they do it?
Um, they ask for quotes, and I mean, generally, this part of the reason why I'm here is that I just got back from a trade show and had the the same conversation over a dozen times that I say, hey, we're a 3D product animation studio, and their response is, oh yeah, we've done that. It's too expensive. Um, without even throwing a number out there, they're telling me, 3D as a whole is too expensive. Um, so ultimately, to answer your question, yes, we do our best to work with them with what they have and what they're willing to spend.
Yeah. The
But yeah,
Go ahead, Matt.
I think it's interesting. Like you've got to like everyone's at video is so demystified for people nowadays. Like I remember when I started, it used to be this dark art and no one understood what it meant, and you could tell them this is $50 million or this is but no one had price, and now everyone feels like they're an expert, and it's all
Mm.
like the shroud's been ripped down. But you need to recontextualize the value to them. I actually, when I had my business, the explainers, I realized that yeah, if you just start competing on price, that's a race to the bottom. Like you're always going to get undercut because there's always someone
Mhm.
cheaper. So you need to contextualize it in terms of the value you're bringing, which is a business outcome. And so uh, I framed all my case studies in terms of business outcomes, and I said this is a video for launching a new product, or this is a video for explaining a complicated new service. And within that, there are different values that people have. So if it's just something internally, like replacing a PowerPoint, yes, that's got a certain value. But again, if it's showing a visiting CEO from Korea who might buy the company, that's got a very different value. And they might surprisingly pull $50,000 out of a bag that they never mentioned before. And I think and sometimes giving people FOMO, like saying, well, your competitors are doing this. And I know that you want to spend $3,000 and make something that looks like balls, but how about you don't? And
Yeah,
giving them the option to spend more money, because they have it. They're just being tight.
especially
Ryan,
right now.
Ryan, I like your question because I do think it's interesting that somewhere in the food chain that we exist in with our clients, someone has decided what the value proposition is. So basically, it's worth this spending to get the project done and buy that media because they're understanding a certain return on investment. But by the time it gets to the creative field, they basically say, just make me 30 seconds or make me a video that does this. And then we don't really have an engagement that says, well, how much is this going to be worth, right? If you're going to sell a B2 bomber, at $7 billion, isn't that 30 seconds worth a lot more than if you were selling, a vacuum cleaner for the same 30 seconds? Ryan, do you want to chime in at all with any more? Did I pick up on the
Yeah,
question?
yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about it recently because there's so much. Everyone that we talk to in our industry is being asked to prove, like, client-wise, being asked to prove like their value at the companies they work for, right? And if they're moving to a new place, they're trying to work up the ladder to be able to give a chance to hire us for something. But I feel like sooner or later, with as much of everything being data-driven in every industry, why aren't we asked to prove like the validity or value of like the thing we're going to make in terms of like you say you're an expert, you made a pretty thing or you made something that looks like it was difficult to make, but like that's great. Does that mean anything to my audience? Does it, especially now if you spend more time talking to content creators that live on YouTube or on TikTok or Instagram or wherever else, they are getting so much smarter than we are in terms of calibrating their design decisions and their animation choices and their editing choices on things that have nothing to do with creative decisions, but literally like time watched on a video. Ask an 18-year-old how much they obsess over like the title to their YouTube video or the thumbnail or if they're A/B testing, and then ask any rank and file motion design owner, do you ever think about that? Do you ever talk about that? Can you prove why, your decision for making something red or blue in the first 3 seconds is gonna make someone actually watch my YouTube video? Like, if they asked us that, we would shrink back. We're like, no, like, but that's a common conversation in almost every other industry that makes the same stuff we make right now. I'm just waiting for the moment when those questions start hitting us like on the regular.
Yeah, you're pointing out something very smart, which is that the responsibility, if you're going to ask for a larger value proposition, the responsibility comes back to you to prove that you got it as well. So agencies that do media buys also do the analytics to prove that they got the eyeballs they were looking for. We live in a safe place. Is like, we gave you 30 seconds. Isn't it worth something? And like, I don't know what was, like, we didn't measure it beforehand. We didn't take any risk, and we didn't measure it afterward. We don't get the return on that kind of conversation.
Well, I think about like how do I find artists to hire? A lot of times it's not the best artists, it's the artists who know how to get their work in front of my eyeballs, right? Like people who know how to traverse LinkedIn and traverse Instagram or have a following on YouTube or whatever. Like, I would assume at some point they're going to be like, well, when have you made something that's moved the needle on YouTube? And do you track that? Do you know that? Do you care about that? Like,
yeah.
I feel like that's, if we're not being asked to do it, I feel like that's at least a key possible differentiator. If you were the studio that came in and said, I will make a LinkedIn video that gets to 5 of your top 50 clients, potential clients.
But this is actually why I'm encouraging and encouraged by B2B relationships, is because where would you grow that capability? Well, you grow it with strong relationships. And so you're getting into the headspace of people that are having that conversation and making decisions for that reason. And they like you. You're not running around with the pick me kind of situation. You're not as desperate for that relationship because you actually can ask them, hey, how do you measure this? How will we know the return? If I did an A/B test for you, would that be helpful? And we can start increasing our capabilities and knowledge through our partnerships with the B2B, with clients using B2B models, because B2C just goes so fast, and they kind of like, we hired you to do something, kind of shut up and get it done and get out of here. Their job, by the way, they're not mad at you. Their job is a commercial producer at an agency. Their job is to churn through it. That decision's made 4 floors up from where they are.
I think a good way to like test it maybe, or like even start getting you and your team into that conversation is like, does anyone here ever ask a client a month or two after you've actually delivered something, how did that do for you?
Right. Yeah.
Did that move the needle? Did it have an effect on social media? Did it perform differently from previous, things that you've tried? Like, to me, that's trying to continue the conversation. It's like, I have a hypothesis. I pitched to you with an hypothesis. You paid me to try it out. I'd love to know, if I was a scientist, if like, did it work? Was my variable better than anybody else? And can we extend that conversation by doubling down or doing something different? Like, feels like there's tools in there to kind of like try to keep the conversation going.
Some of you have entertainment experience, so entertainment marketing experience, and like, if you're in it at trailer park, the opening weekend, you can measure it. How well did our trailers do, our marketing do? Well, we looked at the opening weekends. That was a big, huge part of the marketing conversation. And then based on those numbers, we responded to it. And Nielsen ratings had the same opportunity if you're in the entertainment space. So there were like some more visual metrics available to us when we're doing that kind of promo work. And I feel like we would develop relationships, or could. Again, Lewis, I'm looking at you because you have your camera on, but I know that in that space, those are real conversations you have with your clients that are coming back to you for the next show or the next product or whatever they're launching. I just think it's the relationship management part of it, Ryan, is what you're picking up on, that I really like, is how do we actually understand and develop those relationships that were part of that thinking in the long run.
Yeah, we just had somebody come back for a season 2, and I'm heartened by it, but I'm always a little surprised by it, just because it's so easy to say, oh, we're going to try a different approach this year. You know what I mean? Like, it's completely reasonable to try a different approach. But I was really happy that they came back for season 2. It's just, it's not that common in entertainment to stay with the company that got you there, I mean,
yeah. And it's, don't you feel like you had to like earn the right to be part of that conversation a little bit? And, I don't know, a while ago. And now I feel like it's, Ryan's pointing out, like, I think it's becoming more common sense that you would be doing that stuff. Yeah. I want Jocelyn to come here too. Jocelyn, would you jump in and tell us what you're doing analytics wise? This whole conversation went to analytics, but I think that it's having the big picture takeaway still.
Oh, we're dealing with engineers.
That's awesome.
I know.
Hey y'all, can you hear me okay? I can't be on camera, but I can chime in a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, we've been doing more podcast work lately, and we're noticing the same thing that Ryan mentioned, that they wanted to do this, they thought it was a great idea, and we were pushing them. It seemed like on the analytics piece, yeah, we'd love to build this in to know the downloads, the listenership, the demographics, all of that. And it seems like it's a nice to have for them. Like, that's not the true value, that's not the true impact. So we're obviously want to track that for us going forward, because that is an important component of what we're trying to deliver. But for them, the larger value piece is the storytelling aspect and what they're getting for their company. So yeah, it's been an interesting one, because I think that going forward, we want to know those numbers, because we see that as something that's important to track, but like, we're teasing that out right now. So this is a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, that's really great. And I do see people, especially that are doing sound podcast stuff, it becomes another numbers game that they can kind of promote and push. Different clients that they have, different topics that they're choosing, and so on. They can see the numbers in front of them. It's measurable, and then they can kind of work around that and keep on working strategically with their client.
I've even been looking at the analytics of pitch decks I send out. Like, I do everything in Canva, and you can just see the analytics of how many people opened this pitch. And sometimes it's disgraceful. Like, someone was begging for a presentation, and then I saw that they actually viewed it for 4 seconds. But then when someone else is like, oh my God, 12 people have seen this and it's been open for 19 hours. I couldn't tell if someone just left it on their laptop and went away for the weekend. But maybe they didn't. Maybe they watched it a lot.
So maybe we could get more practical for Joe, because you guys are all kind of speaking from different experiences. And he's saying, like, hey, he has these clients. They're going B2B with their work, right? It's not a commercial based analytics in a way. Almost easier to measure. If there's 12 people in the room and they did the sell, really the follow through might be a big part of your understanding of your value, is to understand how to follow through with that client and see what you can do differently or improve it. Does anybody have any advice for Joe of like how to ask for that, or how to pitch that as part of his value proposition? I just put you all on the spot. Look at you guys. All three of you looked away. Because to some degree, you can even ask. I'll start with you. Start with asking a question up front. Who in the content creation, it makes sense of like asking the question, who is this for? How big is your audience? What does a win look like? Those kind of things are very, very easy to kind of just begin with in the conversation, and then making note of that. Oh, I get it. I get what we're trying to do. And then somehow asking permission to follow through. And you don't have to ask it in the permission-based way, but get a sense of like, to be able to follow through and say, like, did we accomplish the goal? Or more important, the next time we do it, how do we improve it? So how do I take that really good relationship-based sales that you're doing, and then be able to say, I want to learn from you as we grow.
Yeah, I mean, asking for postmortems, I think, is a really good idea. And sort of staging it from the very beginning that you're going to have that conversation. We've done that a few times with people where we want to kind of talk afterwards, and we make it part of the conversation about if we're going to share the work, or and again, in the B2B space it's a little different, but you can have that conversation about how it went and how you feel about it. And I think what Tim said about like what a win looks like is smart as well.
Yeah.
And sometimes you have to invent your own analytics. Like you might be in a situation where there are no clear analytics. So I think when you're asking for what a win is, it's inventing what matters to them. And it's not going to be millions of views. It might just be like, I had one project where it just mattered on one person, and It really got down to the fact that there was this government person that needed to interact with this other government person, and it was them finding a space to actually communicate, which was behind this whole project.
Yeah, that's a heavy ask to get one person and as agreement, but that's all what our pitches are all the time, isn't it? So even to teach your client, how to pitch and into how to win pitches would be great. Yeah. Ryan, I like the point you're making too, is that when you're in some of these client cases, the person, the buyer, the client is a chemical engineer or something like that. Their specialty isn't necessarily in marketing. So to convince them that your video is going to have more value than their invention, it's a very different kind of conversation. Like, I know your invention's great, but if we make a video, it's going to be worth a lot. They're thinking, I'm pretty sure my invention's worth a lot.
Yeah, but they know. I always feel like no one ever wants to say what they think it should be because they're afraid that they're going to be wrong, and that's why they're paying you to defer the responsibility of being wrong, right? Like, I feel like sometimes you get hired just because they're like, I'm not going to be the one who says what it should be, but if they do and it's wrong, well, we'll just hire someone else. But I feel like in a conversation, people love saying what something's not supposed to be, right? Like at the beginning of a pitch, I'm always like, tell me 2 things it shouldn't be, and people won't stop talking. And I feel like if I use that like judo, and the same thing where it's like, tell me something that you're jealous of. Tell me what worked for your competitor that you wish you did and you feel stupid for not doing. That stuff comes pouring out when you say that, right? And then that almost like you can reverse engineer, like, oh, it wasn't about selling stuff, it was about looking cool. And it sucks that Coke looked cool and Pepsi's always the last thing somebody wants to drink, and I'm sick of being in that position. If you find that out, like, that's almost a great barometer for like what the real win's gonna be.
It's a fun way to ask a question too. Kind of cheesy. What does a win look like? It's kind of a cheesy question, but to say, what would you be jealous of if your competitor did it? That's a very different.
No one, yeah. I mean, everybody has that thing that they wish they got the raise for or got the promotion for, right? But no one's gonna be like, have analytics detailed in that first call about like what you have to hit.
Yeah. How do we do, Joe? Did we
it was great. Yeah, all of this is super helpful, and it does. I mean, at the core, maybe the value for me is just realizing that I'm not alone in this. And we have done retrospectives. It's something that's on kind of part of our procedure, is to go back and talk to people and ask them essentially what went well, what didn't, what can we do better. And a lot of times it's been frustrating that the results are so fluffy that generally it's like, oh, everybody loves the video. But my inclination is, I want to see the numbers to show me on a spreadsheet where something changed. But maybe that is a win, maybe to Jocelyn's point, maybe the fact that everybody loved it, maybe that is the win in a B2B environment.
Yeah, I think that is I'll say, like, I think that's when you ask the question, what is the challenge? When you ask the question about how do we convince our clients that we have a value proposition, I'm basically saying, like, well, take some responsibility for it. When I did a podcast called Hollywood Breaks, there's a guy named Kevin Getz, and Kevin invented the film screening process to sit down with directors and tell them, this is what's good or bad about your film according to what this audience is saying. And he had to think through, how do you ask the questions and how do I get the answers from that audience so that it gives director the answers and basically feedback the director wants, not just random feedback, right? But I think when you take that knowledge and conversation from one client to the next, your value increases as a business. Because you say, what I've learned over the last few years working with my other clients is we should do this and we do this. And now you're the advisor in the room and you're sought after more and more. So a 3 or 5 year return in that conversation can be very big. And again, what I love about these B2B clients is that we get to be more in partnership with them and have those conversations. Yeah, really great. Well, thank you guys very much for being part of the conversation today. It's great to have you. It's fun to stir up this stuff when we have to discover the answers together and know the pieces. And people like Jocelyn, thank you for chiming in and throwing out some of your experience here. It's really great. I do appreciate you guys all and jumping into this. This is the best part about community, is finding the problems and finding the answers together. If anyone's interested in continuing this conversation, in about 25 minutes, we are going to do a small group on community, and I'll post that. We can kind of keep the conversation going, because the people in the small group said they weren't going to make it to this half hour, so they wanted me to keep it going there. So if you want to keep on going, I'll post that in community, and we can you guys can join us in the small group. In the meantime, good to see you all, and we'll catch up with you next week. You have a wonderful week. And Joe, thanks for taking the time. Join us.
Of course. Thanks, everybody.
Of
Thanks,
course.
Tim.
We'll see you guys later.